In today's rapidly growing world, much of the development that we see is often at the cost of our environment. Trees are being replaced by skyscrapers, chirping birds are drowned out by bustling traffic, and our lush forests have now become urban jungles. As green lands give way to gray concrete, we need to hold more conversations around protecting our planet and sustainable development. Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Gari.
I'm Sanjana.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Yukta.
And we are part of the President's Award for Global Learning at the University of Texas at Austin. For the past almost 2 years, we've been working with the program to explore human-environment interactions in Texas and abroad. Some of the questions we were especially interested in answering were how do different people view the environment, and what is nature used for, and who uses it?
One place where these conversations are happening is South Padre Island, Texas. South Padre Island is known for its beautiful beaches and is a popular spring break and summer vacation destination. As a popular tourist spot, South Padre contains many hotels, restaurants, and entertainment opportunities, and it even attracts foreign investors from Mexico to manage hotels on the island. As Texans ourselves, we wanted to look at other Texas communities to see how they are approaching sustainable development in these conversations.
While tourism is a big part of island life, South Padre Island also plays an important role in environmental protection because it's the longest barrier island in the world. A barrier island is a type of dune system. As waves hit the shore, they deposit sediment and form dunes. When intense tropical storms hit these dunes, they absorb a lot of the impact and protect the mainland. Meaning without South Padre as a barrier island, our home here in Texas would be in danger from every hurricane and tropical storm.
South Padre is also an important wildlife habitat. It's one out of only 2 places in the world where the world's most endangered sea turtle, the Kemp's Ridley turtle, nests. And if you've ever visited the island and seen the sea turtle logos everywhere, you know how seriously they take this responsibility. South Padre is also a stop for over 300 species of migratory birds and actually brings in a lot of tourism from bird watching.
Both the environment and tourism are vital parts of South Padre's culture, so the island is constantly trying to find ways for them to coexist. This balance between environmentalism and tourism interested us, and we wanted to explore it by interviewing locals on the island. In October of 2021, we got to travel to the island for 2 weekends and talk to business owners, people working in local government, environmental professionals, and locals about how they view the balance between environmentalism and tourism. And for the rest of this podcast, we'll be discussing what we learned from those interviews.
At first, we didn't know much about what it takes to maintain a beach or the environmental problems that people living on beaches experience. One of the first things we heard a couple of people on the island talking about was shoreline erosion. Our first day on the island, we met with Christina Bobarca, the shoreline director of South Padre Island. Not many coastal communities have a distinct department dedicated to protecting the shoreline. Most of the time, this responsibility is assigned to the city's Parks and Rec department. But by creating the specialized department, South Padre has taken a more proactive approach to preserving their beaches.
Christina told us about the importance of dune restoration in the beaches of South Padre Island. Sand dunes play a vital role in protecting islands from coastal erosion, and dune restoration involves re-establishing native plants and anchoring sand dunes in place on beaches. Sand dunes can also help protect beachfront property during storms or high tides. Even though the Texas beaches are public property and the Shoreline Department is responsible for sand dune restoration, Christina mentioned that some residents are actually using their own money to restore the dunes that are in front of their beachfront properties because these residents had seen property destruction during previous erosion events.
Similarly, Barry Patel, a prominent hotel owner and former mayor of the island, advocated for funneling funds from hotel taxes towards beach restoration. The tax would increase hotel prices for tourists, but the extra money would go to the shoreline department, not back into the business itself. However, the hotel owners still got on board with the plan because they acknowledged the importance of protecting the dunes to protect their property and the beaches for tourism.
One interesting story Barry told us was about an erosion event that happened 15 years ago. He said that at the time, people on the island weren't actively thinking about protecting the beaches. But he owned beachfront property, and during the erosion event, he saw chunks of the sand on the beach being taken away by the waves. For him, it was a light bulb moment to start actively building the sand dunes to protect the beaches. So during his time in local government, that was something he focused on with the Shoreline Department. And 8 months ago, South Padre experienced another erosion event similar to the one that happened 15 years ago. But because they were now actively protecting the sand dunes, it didn't impact the beach at nearly as much as it did in the past. In Barry's words,
a sustainable community is one that plans well.
On top of restoring the sand dunes on the beaches, the island also has a lot of programs for picking up trash along the coast. When we first visited the beaches with Christina, everywhere we went, we'd notice signs encouraging visitors to pick up after themselves. Christina also told us that the Shoreline Department comes out early every morning to pick up litter. For South Padre, keeping the beaches spotless isn't just about aesthetics. It also has major environmental consequences. Sure, a clean white sand beach is nice for tourists to enjoy, but more importantly, it protects wildlife and prevents our trash from polluting the Gulf of Mexico.
Interestingly, when we visited the island, we would watch the sunrise on the north end of the island, which is outside South Padre City jurisdiction. So the Shoreline Department of South Padre doesn't oversee these beaches. We noticed significantly more litter on the shore on the shore of the north end compared to the shore within South Padre city limits.
But trash management isn't just the Shoreline Department's responsibility. The whole community often participates in maintaining the beaches. One morning that we were on the island, we called Joe Rico, who is a councilman and a restaurant owner on the island, to schedule a meeting with us later that day. When he picked up, he'd actually just come back from a trash recycling event that morning, which is something that he said he does often. He also told us that a lot of times even tourists come out to help after seeing flyers for the recycling programs in their hotels. The tourists get to spend their mornings meeting locals, and they also get to give back to this beautiful island that they're vacationing at.
and this interest in volunteering was something that we saw was shared across the island. When we talked to Cush and Mackenzie, two locals who went to school near the island, they explained how a lot of their volunteering hours in high school came from cleaning the beaches.
Another person who has been involved in local government is City Council member Lydia Caballero. She gave us a couple of everyday examples of how the tourist industry's interests and environmental interests interact on the island. One of these examples was from the day before our interview, when she got a call from a resident about small white styrofoam pebbles in the drains. She made some calls around the city and found out that a builder was using styrofoam in construction and that the styrofoam was blowing into the drains. She quickly contacted the construction crews and told them to put a shield around the blower so that the styrofoam doesn't contaminate the city's drainage system and make its way to the ocean.
Another example was of an instance where the city's tourism director allowed the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile to drive onto the beach for tourist purposes. The shoreline director, Christina Boberka, called the tourism director and told him he must get the mobile off the sand. Lydia mentioned that she would never think that the mobile would pose an environmental threat, but that Christina said it could be leaking oil or pollute the beach in some way. In both these cases that Lydia mentioned, the solution to the problem was the one that was more environmentally friendly.
Another interesting idea that we encountered was the shifting of the island's marketing to being more family-friendly oriented. South Padre has historically been a spring break destination for college students, but more recently, families have been visiting the island year-round. We talked to the island's marketing and communications manager, Teresa Rodriguez, who highlighted this transition.
She showed us in the videos that the marketing department put together to help draw people to the island. Do y'all remember the one that was targeted to college students specifically, that suggested that they tell their parents that they're doing research on the island, but really it's just an excuse to party over spring break?
And of course, we couldn't relate to that one at all.
But actually, another video that we remember showed families walking on the beach and going on dolphin watching tours. And it just really highlighted for us how South Padre has something for everyone and how they really market differently to each of these groups, such as spring breakers versus families.
While part of the decline in spring breakers has been happening naturally due to college students choosing other destinations for vacation, the island has also been making a conscious effort to market towards other demographics. Teresa noted the increases in families and winter Texans. Winter Texans is a term we heard a lot during our trip and refers to people who make the warmer weather of Texas their home during the winter months. These demographics are often more interested in ecotourism activities such as birdwatching, dolphin tours, fishing, and more.
Another activity mentioned multiple times during our trip was the Sea Turtle Trail, a new marketing strategy implemented by the city. In this activity, visitors can visit all the sea turtle statues around the island and mark them off a map. If they visit all of them and bring the marked map back to the visitor center, they get a free prize. The constant imagery of sea turtles reminds residents and tourists that the island is a shared space. We are sharing the space with the sea turtles and countless other wildlife.
I remember when we visited a souvenir shop to get something to remember our trip by. When we walked in, there were so many things in there, t-shirts, magnets, sweatshirts, and so much more with turtles on it. It was just a really good reminder that we're sharing the island with turtles. It's not just us there.
That reminds me of something Wendy Knight from Sea Turtle Inc. said. Here's a clip from her interview.
We want people that come here to understand that they are privileged to share the beach with sea turtles and that there is something they can do, even if they don't live water side like it is here. And that's really what we're going for.
One of the biggest ecotourism centers on the island is Sea Turtle Inc. We had the pleasure of visiting Sea Turtle Inc. and interviewing the CEO, Wendy Knight, and Chief Conservation Officer, Amy Bonka. The Sea Turtle Inc. is a nonprofit organization that has a threefold mission of educating, rehabilitating, and leading with conservation. The building has many exhibits educating visitors about the ecological importance of sea turtles and how to protect the creature. They have an active sea turtle hospital that rehabilitates the injured turtles as well.
Actually, one really meaningful tradition that Sea Turtle Inc. has is giving the honor of naming a sea turtle that is brought in for rehabilitation to its rescuers. Wendy and Amy told us about one family in particular that was visiting South Padre from Hawaii. On their first day, they rescued a sea turtle, and when they brought it in, they decided to give it this beautiful Hawaiian name. And for them, finding the sea turtle was such a big moment that for the rest of their trip, they tried to find as many sea turtles in need of help as they could. By the end, they had found literally more than anyone else had found before on their trip. And, this is just a way for visitors to feel more connected to the island and leave this really tangible connection through these sea turtles that they rescued, even after they've left.
Sea Turtle Inc. also organizes volunteers to patrol the beaches during nesting season. So during nesting season, they have volunteers out 24/7 to make sure that the turtles are getting to the water without being harmed. One interesting thing they told us is that all the money from the admissions tickets goes directly back into the research and conservation work the organization does. So they have a limited number of paid employees, and most of their task force is composed of volunteers. Wendy also told us a really great story about how dedicated their volunteers are. So last year, Texas was hit by a really bad winter storm, and we very rarely get storms with a week of freezing temperatures, so no one was prepared for it. When the storm hit South Padre, all the sea turtles went into a cold stun, which is a state they get in when they're really cold and become too weak or inactive to function on their own. It was too cold for too long for the turtles to recover on their own, so Sea Turtle Inc. and hundreds of people from the island volunteered to rescue the turtles. And they would bring them to the convention center of the island, so there ended up being over 5,000 turtles in the building. Most of the residents on the island lost water and electricity at this time, so they were dealing with their own problems, but they still took time to help rescue the turtles.
The Birding Center is another nonprofit on the island that we got to visit. They use all the admission revenue to put back into their conservation efforts and have a large volunteer force just like Sea Turtle Inc. We spent a morning strolling through the mangrove forest and watching birds and alligators and fish jumping. I remember one of my favorite parts of the birding center were the large tortoises. If visitors donate a small amount of money, they can get some lettuce to feed the tortoises. And we got especially attached to one tortoise whose name was Bubbles. He came running from his habitat when he heard us with the lettuce.
Both of these centers were really special to visit because they showed us that environmentalism and tourism complement one another. Both organizations had activities tourists could participate in while visiting the island. and the revenue from the tourists was being used to fund the organization's missions. The organizations also highlighted how environmentalism and tourism can be connected through education. The centers offered families and visitors a place to learn about South Padre's nature and the importance of protecting it during their trip of visiting the natural sites themselves.
Looking back at our time in South Padre, it was really refreshing to see how much the people in South Padre cared about the environment. But we noticed that when people in South Padre do things that we would deem as environmentally friendly, their actions don't carry the weight of the term environmentalism. When I do things that are environmentally friendly, like using a reusable bag or taking shorter showers, a lot of the times I'm doing it because I'm thinking about the environmental impact of those actions. But the people we talk to in South Padre really just see their actions as what it takes to live on an island in such close proximity to the environment and to ensure the beauty of the environment for more generations. For example, Joe Rico, the councilman we mentioned earlier, volunteers at recycling events during the weekends because he thinks it's the right things to do, not because of the larger concept of ocean pollution or landfills getting full.
One interesting takeaway from this project is how it can be used to build public support for environmental initiatives. On the island, we noticed that rather than thinking about protecting the environment through the lens of climate change or human impacts on the environment, which are pretty abstract concepts, the people living there focus more on tangible activities that they have control over to help protect the environment. When we asked Joe Rico what he thinks of the term environmentalism, he stated,
Well, it's all tied together. I mean, it just different names, or no, it doesn't need a name sometimes. Just the right thing doesn't need a name sometimes. It's just the right thing.
I think this has implications for how we frame policies and activities that support environmental protection. Oftentimes, when we hear politicians or professionals talk about environmentalism, it's framed around big concepts like climate change. But maybe if we talk about environmentalism in terms of how it can help people's homes and families, we could increase buy-in for environmental initiatives.
Now, don't get us wrong. It's not that we think talking about climate change is a bad thing, or even that it's not important. We think it's vital that we're aware of the bigger issues surrounding us and the future of our planet. But breaking down these big picture problems into more everyday goals puts us one step closer to protecting our environment. And showing the tangible benefits will make environmentalism feel more accessible and more relevant to everyone's lives, including those people who maybe aren't thinking about it or who aren't really worried about the implications of climate change.
Yeah, and one of the most important things we learned from this project is the importance of how we frame environmentalism to build public support around policies and activities that support environmental protection. In addition to talking about the environmental benefits, we can also emphasize the personal incentives of these actions. Picking up litter on the beaches not only protects wildlife, but it also keeps the beaches beautiful for our own enjoyment. Building up sand dunes not only protects shorelines from erosions, but it also protects your own property in the long run. And volunteering for recycling programs not only keeps trash out of landfills, but it can also be a fun family activity to connect with your community.
This project has helped us change our own perspectives on environmentalism. In today's day and age, environmentalism is so politically divided. Something everyone can agree on is that people are doing harmful things to the environment, but the causes and how these changes should be addressed is disputed. We acknowledge that a lot of environmental degradation and harm are done by larger corporations and institutions rather than just individuals and communities. But understanding how individuals and communities can take part in the fight against environmental harm can inform our daily activities. It doesn't have to be huge changes we're making. It's the small decisions and activities that could make a big difference.
For me personally, the thing that left the greatest impact was the community and how passionate they are about protecting their home. The four of us all grew up in different suburbs of Dallas, so we definitely know what it was like to live in a really rapidly developing city. It feels like every few weeks a new part of town is being developed. But the biggest difference between development in Dallas versus development in South Padre is how much environmental impact was discussed. Not that our hometowns didn't care about the environment, but a lot of residents and business owners' concerns seem to be more about road closures, traffic, and noise, just because that was what impacted our daily lives. Our lives weren't fundamentally interconnected with our environment, so the environmental implications of development in Dallas kind of seem like more of an afterthought for the locals there. Versus in South Padre, environmental impact is at the heart of every single decision made about development, because their entire economy depends on the beaches and the waters. In Barry Patel's words, sand is their currency. So when development happens, the biggest priority is making sure that the environment is also protected.
The other thing that caught my attention was how these discussions weren't political. I think in America we often see environmentalism and climate change being turned into political issues, but in South Padre, people of all political beliefs and backgrounds come together to protect their environments. Because for them, this isn't a question of right wing versus left wing, it's a matter of their homes and their jobs. And by framing environmentalism this way, and not through a political lens, we can better discuss what we can do to protect our environment.
What really stood out to me was how welcoming everyone was to us. We felt so at home and comfortable at every restaurant, hotel, and attraction on the island. I think this is a testament to how close-knit and vibrant the South Padre community is, and we feel so fortunate to have been a part of it for a couple of weekends. Thank you to everyone on the island and our faculty mentors, Dr. Jason Kahns, Dr. Aaron Lentz, Professor Deepak Chetty, and our graduate students Sachin and Sebastian. Thank you to the President's Award for Global Learning. We wouldn't have been able to do this opportunity without the program.